Hello. So today we're back with the third episode of the Ball Over Passion podcast. Today is the 2021 season review of the past season Arsenal just had. I'm joined with PrivarsenalZ,
Hello.
Jimmy Conway,
Yes. How you guys doing?
and George.
Hey lads, good to discuss this one. There might be some overlap, but we're here and we're ready to go.
Okay, so for me, this is probably the season that's felt the longest in a very long time. The season went over. It started later than usual and felt longer than normal. The season was eventful, if I could say, for an Arsenal fan. What did you guys think of the season overall?
Yeah. In terms of the season overall, I think it's just been jam-packed with loads of games. If that makes sense. And obviously, some teams had issues with COVID and stuff like that, and they had to play loads of games and stuff like that. So it just seems like every other day for I don't know, a couple months, it just seemed like there was just loads of games. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's also been a lot of weird cases in this season where I think there's been no home advantage. That's been proven for a fact if we look over statistics. So also injuries, soft tissue injuries have increased by roughly 30% across the league. And then when you kind of translate it back into looking at the top six, I think one of the big critiques of Arsenal this season is that the efficiency in our forward line has been really lacking. But actually, if you look through every single top six fan base, I would argue they might think that their forward line and efficiency actually has been decreased. So it's been really a top six problem. And I've noticed a lot of really weird tropes across this season that need to be taken maybe in isolation, given the fact that there are no fans. It's a very unique case study if you actually look at it across the history of the EPL. There's been a lot of weird patterns that we're seeing that have not been seen before.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. I mean, to be fair, when we're looking at the season from a broad perspective, what have we seen throughout the season? We've seen a lot more away wins than home wins for majority of the top six. I think that home form for majority of the teams have probably decided that top six, that top four, the Champions League and Europa League spots. For example, we've looked at Leicester City. Their away form I think has been pretty impressive this season, but their home form has been shambolic to say the least, and ultimately that's what cost them the Champions League spot. So yeah, I mean, it has been a very, very weird season, and I think Arsenal's probably taken the worst bite of the weirdness. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to discuss more. To be fair, let's see what's going on.
Yeah, overall, I think the season's been a bit weird with the gap between the supposed top six and the rest of the league very much closing. Everyone else is much closer. As you can see, the space between fourth and eighth was only 6 points. So you can see the decrease in disparity between the big six and everybody else. So, okay. First question, Arsenal. What did you make of our start to the season?
Is that for me?
Yeah, you can go.
I think obviously it's difficult because we started off, I think it was against Fulham, if I'm correct, and obviously that started off well. But other than that, obviously the first half of the season, I think the first couple of games were decent, if in other words, but then it just tailed off, if that makes sense, till January and stuff like that, before we started picking up points. But first half of the season, it was okay to a sense, but then we hit that patch where things were not going right at all.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, if we actually look at the start of the season, we started it very well. In the Community Shield, I think we actually played very, very well against Liverpool, and then I thought probably this is going to be an amazing season, and we started off against Fulham, and we won comfortably as well. And very quickly, I realized that this team looks off for some reason, and as the season went on, I realized our build-up play did not look as efficient and as confident as we did, last season. And I think that's probably due to the profiles that we brought in, and we lost. For instance, we lost Emi Martinez in goal. He was actually very essential to our build-up play, and we brought in someone like Gabriel, who I think has done great this season, but ultimately he's had a difficult time adjusting. So I think we've seen that from the start of the season, and as time went on, and more of the games went on, we saw that we were trying to cover the cracks, that were opening up even more. And then ultimately, what happened was, after that Manchester United game, where we thought, okay, we've turned the corner, we've beaten a big team away from home, we started losing games at home one after the other, and then we end up 15th. So I'd say it was a misleading start to the season.
That's a great way to put it, to be honest, a misleading way.
Well, you know what it was for me, lads? It was, I hate to be that guy, but I was really worried at the start of the season when we didn't get Aouar, and when I knew that Thomas Partey was injured, and knowing his injury from the start. And we've talked about this on the podcast quite regularly, where when you look at sustaining attacking patterns, we need to, and it's worthy of saying this again, that you need to have control of your transitions, and you need to have a presence between the thirds. What I knew is that, given that we were going to switch to a back four, and that was really quite evident in the preseason games if we watched, we were no longer going to have that security that the back three left us. And so that transitional control became even more important, but more importantly, we needed an outlet further up. And so what happened was Arteta didn't trust the technical security of our back six once Emi Martinez left. And so when you have people dropping in, you need a reliable outlet both in the first phase but also in the last phase. And we just simply didn't have that. And so when you remove an Aouar or even an Aouar type, and then you have Thomas Partey, who's only sparingly available, I think he only amassed roughly 3 games between September to November in between our worst run of the season, and that's no coincidence. So when you add Gabriel, who by his own standards is an excellent off-the-ball defender but struggles in short to medium range, you aren't fixing any of the problems that you've dealt with the team. So when you start kicking a chair that only has 3 legs down, it's going to collapse when you remove one of the core pillars. So I really did struggle with the start of the season, but I could kind of predict where we were headed, given the idea of who was available, and as well what ended up happening from the summer in terms of our outgoings and ultimately who we lacked in our incomings.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're right. I mean, when we look at the start of the season, we saw that starting 11, and to me, it felt like we didn't really improve in that window. It felt like, okay, we brought Thomas Partey in, but he wasn't playing, and then we brought Willian in, and we know what Willian can do. But the fact is, with Chelsea, his output has been actually misleading. He's not always been the best, and I'd love for a Chelsea fan to be on the podcast, and they'll vouch for it as well, and they'll say they were happy to see Willian go. So, the fact that we were relying on creative output on Willian was probably one of the most shocking parts of the season. And yeah, I think I'm glad that the second half of the season went in a better way, because I couldn't have taken it any longer, to be fair.
Can I ask a question? Why do you not think it took so long to introduce Smith Rowe?
Well, he was injured. I can kind of take that off from the start. I mean, he wasn't fit to start the season, and he was picking up niggly muscle injuries in between, but also then got a shoulder dislocation, which takes roughly 3 to 4 weeks to get back from. Even if you are fine, they normally take a longer recovery to ensure that it's not redislocated. So from a perspective of him being even just fit, it wasn't really a possibility. And I do think that after you do return to fitness, there's typically a 3 to 4 week period of you being reintroduced to match fitness, right? So from his perspective, he didn't even have a preseason in an individual sense. So I understood maybe the length of time that we saw in a return to play, but that's why I do bookmark this season. And I don't know what you guys think, but the reason I place so much emphasis on our record from Boxing Day and why you really need to bookmark those season is that I think from that point, you can objectively say that the squad was available. Forget quality in terms of whether or not you debate that, but the profiles in the squad were available from that point to the end of the season, whereas before in those first 4 months, no matter what way results went, I don't know if you can logically argue that there were the profiles available to play, forgetting quality.
I understand what you're trying to say, but at the same time, the season doesn't start when Smith Rowe got introduced. Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. No, and I think that's where I levy actually criticism at the recruitment to start the season in such a manner, right? So when I look at the squad and it's so deficient in terms of its profiles, I actually predicted 8th at the start of the season because I saw that Thomas Partey was injured. I figured, okay, you know what? He's not going to get
Was
back.
he injured when he came to us?
Yeah, he was. Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was injured when he came into us, and then so I assumed it would take a while, forgetting even adaptation, right? So if you're coming in injured, you're not coming in with a preseason, so you're already. We saw the effects actually with Lacazette. Does anybody remember when he had his ankle sprain? I believe it was a year and a half ago, right after his 18-19 season.
Yeah, I remember that.
And if you remember correctly, it took him roughly 8 months to get back to any sort of form.
Yeah. I think he got injured in a preseason Lyon game, if I'm correct, at the Emirates.
Exactly.
I remember that.
And so you can draw parallels with that with Thomas Partey, forgetting even the fact of adaptation, having never played in the EPL, right? So when I look at that, you can't say that we had that profile in the squad until that moment. And so it becomes difficult for me to critique, I guess, is where I come from, where it was bad objectively, but I struggle to then say it's fair to critique somebody if they're not picking them, if that makes sense.
That's true. Again, in terms of recruitment, I think last summer was probably one of the worst from put on this because first of all the whole squad was bloated. How do you keep the likes of like Kolasinac, Mustafi, all these guys that are not going to play? How do you keep happy? You're not, in essence, if that makes sense. So knowing that they're not going to play and they're just in a squad causing havoc and whatever else, it's just going to be an issue within itself. And obviously, the first party coming in with injury, on top of that, kind of have to do a 2-man's job, if that makes sense. Because he has to pick up what Xhaka lacks. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's very, very difficult. And for me, I think a lot of the issues Partey's had, it's not entirely his fault because he came into a mess of a midfield. So this season, for me, it's not really any significance because I think everyone here knows how much Thomas Partey brings. I'm guessing everyone's watched him at Liga and Champions League and everything like that. He has a lot of quality, but it's just the stuff that around him is the issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? I think one thing that I haven't really heard many people talk about is the size of our squad at the start of the season. And then let's have a look at the size of the squad, even in January, when you look at that coinciding of form. So forgetting the idea far more. And as a coach, I'm just telling you, I've coached a little bit myself, but to try to organize drills or even getting across some kind of management with that size of squad is almost impossible to keep anybody motivated. How are you supposed to get everybody on board when they know that they're not playing? They know they're not in charge of the long-term future, and they're there just to burn a squad. So it becomes impossible, really, to coordinate.
And to be fair, just to add to that, with the whole squad floating issue, we've had to put players like Saliba playing with the academy, and that's just purely because not only was the squad too bloated, there were certain people within that the squad and the dressing room who were toxic, and they didn't probably have the best interests for Arsenal. They didn't really like the manager, and we needed to get those certain people out. And so the fundamental part was we needed to get rid of those people before the transfer window ended in the summer, but we didn't, and we actually paid the price for 6 months until for 3 months actually until the January window opened. So yeah.
Just to add to Z's point, if I'm not mistaken, I think this season I've seen a lot of under 23s and under 18s training the first team than usual.
Yeah.
That which is sick. We're talking about kids that we've never heard before. I'm talking these guys absolutely only. Like I know of the under 23s, most of them, but the under 18s not so much. But other than like the Hutchinsons, there's another centre midfielder. I forgot his name. Patino and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there's like a couple below them that I've never heard before, and they're actually regularly training first team. So I'm like, why is that? And obviously, it kind of bodes well into maybe someone getting banished from training, because obviously I think there's a lot of things that might come out in the next couple of months. Say, this happened, that happened, because there's a lot of like rumors coming out that there's certain people in the squad that wasn't really in tune with Arteta's tactics or whatever, like the likes of Mustafi and all these kind of people. So that's really interesting to me personally.
Yeah, so the start of the season was weird for our form because like the first 4 games we won 3, we lost 1, so we were 4th at that point, and then the next 4 we lost 3 and we won 1, so we were 9th at that point. Then we go into the next 4, we were 13th at that point, so we kept losing, and then we dropped to 15th, and then 4 games after we beat Chelsea, and then we beat Brighton to end the year with 16 games, and then we were 13th. So from the start to the end of 2020 for us, it was very weird for our form. The introduction of Smith Rowe after his injury and Partey really had a drastic effect on us, as we've seen to the end of the season. A lot of people called for Arteta to be sacked after that November run, and we had that same run weirdly under Emery. The same from October, November, December, we were very poor and we struggled, but the board decided not to sack him. Okay, so going into 2021, what did you make of our January form?
The January form was still a little choppy, but what it did is it gave me a philosophy that I aligned with. It was the first time that I had seen really how Emile Smith-Rowe would function within this team and how he would actually look at attacking patterns. So I kind of talk a lot about pseudo-tens on Twitter, and what I mean by that is really just having options between the lines, comfortable on the half turn, and then able to drive into space. You need those 3 things, and when I looked at anybody who was available prior to that, we never had a reliable option. If you remember, we tried to put Lacazette in that role, thinking that's something that maybe he could do given his attributes. But the one thing Lacazette lacks is, A, he's not as confident in contact from behind as people say he is, but also he can't burst into the space. He doesn't have that 5-10 yard subsequent run. We call it the second man run. Beyond that, so he's involved in the first phase of trapping, setting, and then he can't go after that. So you then, when you introduce somebody like Smith-Rowe who has all of those things, it's no coincidence that then your system becomes a lot more fluent. And if you notice, since January, we started to see the prominence not so much of troubling into a progression, but we started then to struggle in the final third. So we made the transition then with Partey being in that, okay, we now have the progression down. That's the first step that we've ailed in a sense. And then from January, I'd say, till about February, we really struggled with efficiency in the final third and turning final third entries into chances. And that's probably the next segment of our season. I don't know what others felt.
To be fair, since we're going back to January, I think it started obviously from the Chelsea game. There was a lot before that where we had to, when we had to talk about Arteta's way of playing. It looked like Arteta, the way Arteta used to set up was very rigid. It looked very robotic in that sense. But after the inclusion of Emile Smith-Rowe and Saka on the right, it looked like the team played with a lot more elegance and a lot more freedom. And I think that also contributed to us creating a lot more chances. Probably not as many chances, but we have to consider what's already been said in the past, that the quality of chances that were there, were good enough, to be converted into goals. But the fact is, we have to look at someone like Aubameyang's form, who hasn't been the greatest this season. Nicolas Pepe, who has who has not been great until towards the end of the season, and like I said, we already know we can't rely on him to score goals for us on a consistent level. So I think in January, I think the solution was there. The solution was, Arteta found the solution, but ultimately we paid the price for not having a clinical finisher. And hopefully, next season, everybody gets their shooting boots back on, because I'm sure with the quality of chances that our team can produce, and with the inclusion of more attacking signings, we can I think blitz teams apart for sure.
And you know what, Z, just to really quickly build off, people I don't think understand, Martinelli came back and then was quickly injured, but his introduction to the team, like, it's not just simply adding a striker profile equals output. What his movement off the ball and his energy did to the subsequent system and encouraging the press was massive. In fact, he actually did this with Emery, if you do remember. When Martinelli was introduced in our bad reign of form, he was responsible for changing that tide. And, it's not just adding into a profile, and I need people to kind of understand this, where it's how that person affects others in the system. It is not simply just replacing goals. We need goals. Let's put a striker in there. So when you add stuff like this, you've added a goal-scoring presence, you've added presence between the lines, and now you've added energy off the ball, because Emile Smith-Rowe and Martinelli offer far more off the ball than our previous options in Lacazette. Simply they do. So when you add that, you have to expect more, essentially.
Yeah. George, and obviously, Z, I think you lot are spot on. Obviously, before January, we never had the kind of profiles that we have now. For example, Smith-Rowe, I think, changed everything, and I think obviously everyone knows that. But for example, like you said, between the lines, we had literally no options. Between the lines and half six, we had no options. So then when you compare it to like Man City, for example, the amount of options they have between the lines is absurd at times, right? But for the recruitment not to see that and go into season and think, you know what, it's all right. If that makes sense, because they get paid far more than any other fan. If that makes sense, they're supposed to see these kind of things happen. Yeah. So obviously, before January, you could see it was glaringly obvious to see what the issues were, and then Smith-Rowe comes in, he takes a bit of burden for himself, and then Odegaard comes in, and they both can play in tight spaces and like between the lines and everything. I've like most of our forwards can't do that, if that makes sense. Like, for example, Nicolas Pepe, there's obviously reports before he came to us that he needs a lot of space, if that makes sense. I think that's one of the reasons Bayern didn't go for him. There are reports saying that he needs a lot of space to operate the way he plays, and that's why he didn't buy him. But Odegaard coming, that helped everything, like gel everything together, if that makes sense.
Okay. In January we won 3 games and we drew 2 in the league. So I forgot to mention this, but the Carabao Cup, we started off the season in the Carabao Cup against Leicester, I believe. Yes, we started against Leicester and we beat them 2-0. And then we played Liverpool and then we beat them on penalties 5-4. That was in October, I believe. So then, what did you make of them 2 games first off in the EFL Cup?
It's tough for me to really talk about cup competitions, and I kind of got into it in Twitter earlier last night, where I don't like to make legacy statements off of knockout competitions. So it's tough for me to project our opinion on that. Ultimately, what I view them as is, you've beat a good opponent. It's another data point in the positive direction for beating a good opponent, and that's basically it. It's very tough for you then to really make overarching conclusions from something like that. I was actually disappointed in our exit of the Carabao Cup, if I'm really being honest with you, more so than the wins that would have given me as a positive. I think ultimately, when you look at a cup competition, what I like to see is the philosophy being maintained. And if you're able to keep your structure and then get a positive result from that, then excellent. But I don't think it's a metric of success. I look at the league season and consistency over that as the true metric of success. And so for me, while it was great to beat those teams early on, I don't think it necessarily made me believe then that the rest of the season would bode well for top 6 teams. Let's say, for example, because we did one or two good games where we got a good result. But it certainly is just a positive data point. So it's no longer something that you throw away, but that's really what it is for me.
I think also how Arsene Wenger got us used to watching Carabao Cups. We knew ultimately that when the Carabao Cup, the Carling Cup was on, we knew it's an opportunity to see the youngsters play. I think we really had some bad draws. We played Leicester, Liverpool, and City, and to be fair, we didn't get the chance to play some of the youth. I remember Saliba being on the bench for both of the start of the games for Liverpool and Leicester, and he wasn't able to play because we wanted to actually beat those teams. So I think we've been kind of, I don't want to use the word, but shagged by the luck of the draw. But and I think we've been really unlucky because of that. But hopefully this season, I think we're going to play one extra game in the Carabao Cup. We get to see more youth players play because ultimately I want to see all of those players under Mikel Arteta. So
yeah, I think you're spot on because obviously, if you look back, Wenger he didn't really rate the Carabao Cup too much in my opinion, because I think we got into the last final, I think, a couple of years ago against City, if I'm correct. I think Wilshere. I remember Wilshere playing, but Carabao Cup, it's like a joke to him, if that makes sense. And we used to see a lot of that, like the young players or like the players that never used to get a lot of minutes. So that was interesting. But to see not a lot of youngsters in terms of Carabao Cup and like FA Cup, that was really, for me, I wanted to see a lot of that this season. But obviously we didn't get to see that because we got knocked out earlier and stuff like that. But other than that, yeah.
And well, Chris, really quickly before you get going, is I don't even think that Mikel had the chance to do that. So if we actually look at kind of the progress, those games came right in the middle of our crappy form. Can you imagine the backlash that would have been received if in the middle of October, when we started to lose games and we started to become ninth, that we then fielded a team of kids, regardless if it was Leicester or Liverpool?
Yeah.
I mean, the idea on the knock in confidence is just, it's crazy to me. So while, look, I think ultimately I don't want to make it sound like we're making excuses for Arteta or for the club for that matter, because ultimately for Arsenal Football Club to be 15th is not acceptable no matter what happens. But the only thing that I do want to say, though, is I'm not comparing apples and oranges here. Like, the idea that if I'm looking at the top 6 teams in between that run, and I'm sorry that I know we've moved on, but really quickly, it's worth saying, in that 4-month period, if you're not having the right profiles to compare to the other teams, you have no sense in comparing it. And so it becomes really odd to me to then expect excellence. You don't have the profiles to even compete. Forgetting the quality gap for a second, we simply didn't have the profiles in there to complete. And to even back that up even further, Emile Smith-Rowe's win percentage rate, I don't know if you guys even looked up, we said it in the last pod, but it's 69% when he starts, and when he doesn't, it's 23%. Now, that's not just to say that Emile Smith-Rowe is excellent, which he is, but it goes to show having that profile has an effect on output fundamentally to teams. Period. End of story. It doesn't mean then that you can wash the season, but not having him available is a detriment to the squad and its ability to perform.
Yeah, also on the Carabao Cup, not being able to play the youth also came down to us having a massive squad, because a lot of them games were used to use the extra players on the side who didn't get to play in the league or played in Europa, but that wasn't enough for them. Because there were so many players that some didn't even get to play in Europa, like Socrates, for example, who couldn't play in Europa or couldn't play in, I don't think he played in any of the Premier League games. So our squad was so big that we were unable to play youth in those games. Okay, moving on. So the FA Cup, I think we got knocked out the earliest in many years against Southampton. I think we lost 2-0. If I'm not mistaken. What did you make on our FA Cup exit to Southampton?
Did we not play a team before that?
We did.
I can double check for you, but I wasn't. We played Newcastle 2-0. We beat Newcastle 2-0.
Yeah.
On the 9th of January.
That's where Emile Smith-Rowe got his first goal.
Yes, link up with Lacazette.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think, to be fair, again, I was hoping that the FA Cup gives us the opportunity to, field a lot more youngsters, but unfortunately that didn't happen. And the game against Southampton, to be fair, even before the game that took place, I had a feeling that we would have got knocked out, and it's not because we're not good enough to beat Southampton, because we beat them again, but we beat them a few days later. I think it's just because we had to prioritize the league at that time, and unfortunately our second team isn't the best. So ultimately, we had to get knocked out, and the manner, the way we lost that game from a mistake at the back, and that didn't really help us, come back to it. So yeah, I think we got unlucky, but it is what it is.
It's a matter, you know what it is, Z? It's a matter for me. I use this season, and in my overall arching development, everyone asks me, okay, George, what's the process then? Like, what was your expectations? And I use that as an example of the FA Cup because I wanted to see a philosophy this season. I knew the three at the back was not sustainable. I knew it was a patch-up job, and it was to prepare us for the next season in order to go through with what our long-term philosophy would be. And so when I finally saw it, in January, really oddly, that's when I finally said, okay, look, I will accept what happens moving forward as long as I can see a distinct philosophy in both attack and defense that I agree with. And so I saw that, and I didn't really care about league finish personally in the first year. After another set of summer where you rebuild the squad and you can cut away, I then expect a top four finish, but then those expectations raise along with the quality of the squad. It becomes really important because, Z, as you said, the second team simply weren't available or up to the standard to compete. And so you cannot then expect cup competition success unless you're banking on that as an objective of success at the end of the season. What do I mean by that? That was clearly Arteta's goal last season, where a lot of kind of patch-up jobs were, listen, let's just get fundamental success. And then after that, let's move on to a philosophy. So you need to accept the short-term gain for that objective.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, because of the way our first half of the season went, Arteta didn't really have a opportunity to experiment or even play the first team in those games, because ultimately we had to focus on the league. And if it was any other season, where we were hovering around the fourth or fifth, or even a few points off sixth or something like that, we would have played the first team in that game, and I think ultimately we would have won. But that couldn't have happened. We had to focus on the league, and we had to win against Southampton in the Premier League, where we struggled to win. And so yeah, we had to focus on that. I know. I just remember at the time, a lot of fans were really upset that we got knocked out of the FA Cup. They used it as a stick to beat Arteta with, and said, look, that's a trophy that we could have won, that he got knocked out of, blah blah blah. People.
But to be fair, though, we've won it a lot of times anyway. So I think
exactly.
right now we're just looking at progression in terms of other areas.
Exactly.
FA Cup, a Carabao Cup, I don't really think. There's some obviously delusional fans that hold a lot of weight in terms of hold that them kind of cups a lot of weight, but I don't really understand why. Our objectives should be Champions League and trying to win the Prem. I'm kind of done with the cup stuff right now, to be honest, because it's not getting us anywhere. We won the FA Cup, and where did I get us now, for example? The only thing that it did do is get us Europa League football, and that's it. Other than that, yeah, people shouldn't really look at that and trying to beat, Arteta. That's it.
But Jamie, maybe to just build off, I'll quickly ask you, because I think this really comes down to my real big question with fans. What were your expectations going into the season? And because I see a lot of stuff on Twitter right now where, because of the Chelsea win, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about the end of the season before we go.
Oh my God, don't get me started, man.
Yeah, well, because of the overlap, what I've seen across the timeline in fundamental terms really is that, okay, even though that we know that we can't compare ourselves to Chelsea, let's do it. And let's not only do that, but let's compare ourselves and then see, how far we have to get to in order to do that. Meanwhile, we've only ended 6 points away from them. So do you determine cup success, no matter what it is, whether it's Champions League, FA Cup, do you determine knockout success as an overall great objective, or is the league still your best determinant of success?
I think
League
the
tells
league
you
is
everything,
definitely
my
the
friend.
best.
Yeah.
The league is definitely the best determinant. Certain cups carry obviously some sort of success because winning a cup like that is major for the club. But club winning a cup is more luck than winning a league, because in a league, winning the league, you play everybody regardless of who you are. You play every single team twice. Whereas in the cup, you can avoid the bigger teams. Like Chelsea, for example, were on the easier side of the draw, playing Porto and Real Madrid in comparison to Manchester City, who played Dortmund and PSG. So they got luckier. And look at us, for example, in the Europa League, we played Slavia Prague and Villarreal, whereas Manchester United played Roma and
Ajax.
Ajax. Yeah, no, they didn't play Ajax. They played.
Wasn't it Ajax?
Milan.
They
Milan.
beat
They played AC Milan.
AC Milan and Roma. So you
Yeah.
can see we were on the typically easier side of the draw, and the easier side of the draw won against Manchester United. But
And we still messed it up.
yeah, so a cup definitely brings success, but it can't be an overall determinant of how well you did in the season, because there's so much luck involved.
I think you can actually use it as a metric to define success, but it just depends on how you look at it. For instance, if we're looking at how Mikel Arteta joined Arsenal in December, and we won the FA Cup around, I think in around May or June or something like that.
It was August the 1st.
Yeah, so I would look at that FA Cup win and say, you know what, Mikel Arteta did a great job, because he used that period to define his philosophy, his style of play, and he used that to beat Manchester City and Chelsea in style. Now, if I was to say Arteta was here at Arsenal for around 2 seasons, and on average we've been getting 8th and 9th, and then he won the FA Cup, I would say by all means that's no success, because you've just used the luck of the draw. But the fact is, he was there for 6 months and he did that. For me, that was, that for me showed, what, there is progression. Now this season, if he did win the FA Cup and we came 8th again, I would have said, okay, but that doesn't really show me any progress. That's showing me, we're moving sideways. So yeah, I can't say any cups would define progress unless we see movements in the league positions. However, for Chelsea, if we just want to talk about them, Tuchel came in around January or February, and in that short space of time, he got them top 4 and he won them the Champions League. So we can also say, he for him as a manager, he did his job. So yeah.
You know what? The only reason I bring it up is because I find such similarities. What did Tuchel do? He brought in a back 3. What did he do? He brought in central compactness. What did he do? He galvanized a squad to win a cup competition and a knockout competition. Now, I'm not equating UCL to FA Cup success, but when I look at the quality and the floor of the 2 squads, okay, and I look at 2 managers who have taken over mid-season and have employed a back 3 for relative short-term success, the similarities are stark. And this is why I don't understand the hypocrisy of so many fans, where I then would not expect Tuchel to keep the back 3 next season. I would assume he's going to go to a back 4, and there's going to be raised demands of philosophy, and I would expect him to struggle. I'm sorry. And when I look at Arteta too, I look at the expectations. So this season, I drew similar expectations. I want to see a back 4. I want to see a philosophy. I want to move away from this. We did that, but at the expense of not having the profiles to do so, but he did it for the culture change. Now, maybe you can argue, okay, he shouldn't have done that. He should have kept to being a pragmatist, and we would have maybe had more short-term success. But I think long-term, you remove the foundations, not employing this and making the tough calls that he had to do mid-season. So while I knew that this season was a wash, it was a necessary evil, if that makes sense. So kind of a case of taking 1 step back to take 2 forward. I don't know how other people feel in terms of that analogy and comparison.
George, I think you've made such an interesting point. Now thinking about it, Arteta and Tuchel basically made the same decision. They came in and thought, you know what, I need a system that can work for a short time. Then when it comes to summer, You know what? That's a very, very good point, if I'm quite honest. It makes a lot of sense. But the major difference is the academy and the type of players that they have. That makes sense. So their transition, like for example, this summer to next season, if he wants to go to, I don't know, maybe like a back four or whatever, he has the capabilities and he has the backing to be able to do that. If he wants to bring in, I don't know, two new fullbacks, that's no worry. If that makes sense. So
No, for sure. Yeah, no, for sure. And like I don't think that he'll carry the same. I just use it as a metric when I'm looking at two coaches. Is the process wrong? And so while one club has the financial capability to really see that vision out, and ours doesn't, does that make our process therefore wrong? Because we may need to wait a season to see it just because we don't have the financial capability to do it. That's where I question.
Maybe our process is going to be slower because we just don't have the financial means to be able to get to that point, if that makes sense. We might have to, even though I think our scouting system is decent, although I don't think it's the best, we still don't do what we're supposed to do in terms of bringing in young players, if that makes sense. Really, really good young. I think that we can do more. That's what I'm trying to say.
Definitely.
But with Chelsea, they have a world-class academy, right? And I think one thing that that's just, for me, is fascinating, yeah? How Chelsea had Lamptey and Reece James coming through at the same time. For me, that's mind-blowing because both are very, very good. Do you know what I'm saying? We can barely bring in, we can barely bring through a fullback at academy level. Do you know what I'm saying? Although I do think there's one or two right backs in the academy that are decent. It's just so how both clubs operate. It's just so different. That's why one club is successful than another right now, in my opinion.
Well, mate, I bring them up for a very purposed reason because actually, if you do look at our academy right now and you look at the under 23 core that what we're building, you're seeing similarities. And I'm seeing the moves that we've made to line up with these big clubs. Ben Napier, a loan manager, employing that philosophy again, which we talked about in earlier pods. Like these are similarities in the process, I guess, what I'm trying to get across to fans that are able to let us see predictors of success. When we start employing a system of loaning out our youngsters for a purpose, we start producing these youngsters at great degrees, which we are. There has to be some kind of confidence that you take from that. It's not luck or it's not coincidence.
You're spot on because in terms of even where, like, if you look at, I don't know, like 5-10 years ago, where we would send our youngsters out on loan, it just made no sense. Now it looks like there's sort of a system. There's sort of telling clubs, right, bring to us some sort of presentation. Tell us why we're fitting your system. Tell us why, like, just basically convince us, if that makes sense. Yeah. But obviously, I don't really know too much about him. But what I do know is that he's one of the people that makes a decision of where a player goes and where it's best for him to go.
Yeah, I think academy-wise, we're still a few years behind when we're comparing ourselves to Chelsea, Manchester City.
What, players or just infrastructure?
I think infrastructure-wise as well, because Per Mertesacker's only had like a couple of years to rearrange everything, and that's probably been dismantled over the few years that was under Arsene Wenger, for instance. But now we're seeing the rewards. We're seeing players like Saka and Smith-Rowe and being brought into the first team. There's quite a few like Kiddo, Taylor Hart, Miguel Aziz, even Charlie Patino, who all have individual improvement plans in place for them to ultimately take the next step to the first team.
Is it true that that he's got that Arsenal have appointed a coach specifically for him? Because that's what I've heard.
They all have their own specific coaches because not everybody is at their set requirement in terms of physical development. Like for instance, Kiddo Taylor Hart. But yeah, for Charlie Patino, I know for instance he has his own physical coach because he's not at the set requirement of his age standard. But that's for every single player.
Yeah, with the loans you guys are talking about, I think we've seen this season a much more successful batch of players on loans with Willock at Newcastle, who just won Player of the Month, Ballard at Blackpool, who just
One
won
promotion.
promotion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Harry John Jules was doing well at Doncaster before his injury. Matt Smith, Saliba, even Ainsley was doing well. But we've seen many.
I think out of
Yeah.
Matt Smith has probably been the most unluckiest because I'm not correct. We cancelled his loan, or they cancelled his loan, because obviously I think the manager that brought him in got sacked, and the manager that came in didn't really fancy him. Then they cancelled that loan. We sent him out somewhere else, if I'm not mistaken, and that manager didn't really fancy him too. So out of them, he's the most unluckiest, and he's got. For me, I think he's very good, and that's probably one of the reasons why I think throughout the lockdown games last year, he was consistently on the bench, but obviously got no minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what, lads, just to wrap up this little segment personally, I only bring up Chelsea in a sense because you've got perceived success as far as fans are going. I'm just looking off based my timeline from a coach who has done the same process that we have, but with a lower floor of team. And so when I'm trying to understand, okay, what do you guys consider as success and what do you consider as good moving forward? I just see a lot of hypocrisy on the timeline where I'm seeing us make the moves, but we just don't have the floor, nor do we have the financial capability to see it as quick as what we're seeing with Chelsea. So there needs to be a certain level of managing your expectations, understanding where your squad was and where that gap is. And then when you judge a coach's impact or you judge external factors, you need to take into account the floor of your team. You need to take into account the external infrastructure in place. You need to take those things into account when you compare yourselves with people you hope to be compared to. And then you can judge the process as good or bad after that.
Yeah.
You're spot on. Yeah, go on, sorry.
I was going to say quickly on Chelsea, that Chelsea, unlike us, have spent a lot of money in the past 2 windows and still seem underwhelming. Like Chelsea have spent 350 million in the past 2 summer windows and are still underwhelming and still need 4 starters to make the next step in a lot of their fans' opinions. And a lot of people seem surprised that Chelsea even made it to the final or even won it, even after spending that much money. And apparently there's reports they're going to spend another 200 million this summer. So youth will be
Is anyone surprised?
No,
Not
I don't
surprised.
think so. I don't think anyone's surprised.
Not surprised, but you know what, mate? The only reason I bring it up is that I think it's unfair, the level of comparison that we do make if we're not understanding the simple state that each of us are in at this point. So it really comes down to managing expectations. And I do want to pivot to Chris so we can talk about the Villarreal and the Europa League, because it is something that I actually do want to levy some criticism on with the club and really how we handled ourselves in that competition. But just to end this thing on process in terms of my idea, I see the positive indicators, and I hope I've shown to people my logic for how I'm arriving here. And when you look at it compared to Chelsea ourselves, and you look at maybe where you want to go to, you need to follow these different pillars in mind and just see, our Arsenal doing the checklist that we need? Is our infrastructure taking a turn for the better? Is our recruitment taking a turn for the better? Is our philosophy taking a turn for the better? And are we seeing those things progress to how we want them? If not, maybe I'm wrong, but I see very similar trajectories between the two clubs. I just think it's a little wasted on financial potential.
Okay.
I think it's very slow potential. Slow progression comes to everything that is. It's just we're taking way too long with certain things. But yeah, that's just me wrapping up.
Okay, so we spoke about January, and before that, February was a bad month for us in the league. We lost 3 games, and then that's when our Europa League campaign started against Benfica in February. So on Benfica, what did you guys think of both legs? We went 1-1, and then we came back to win 3-2.
I think it's in them 2 games, if I'm not mistaken, Ceballos had a big box play in a negative sense, if that makes sense. And I think
And in Olympiacos.
He's had a howler. In them 2 games, I think even throughout our I think from that knockout stages, our consistent issue, I think, was our attack. Obviously, you can say, oh, we scored, I think, four or five goals against, I think, Slavia Prague or whatever. But especially after that, things weren't just gelling together, if that makes sense. And I do think, obviously, Arteta has a big role to play in that, in terms of how he tries to implement this kind of rigid system where players have to play in certain pockets, certain areas. They can't leave that area, kind of thing, if that makes sense. And even players like Aubameyang, he's had his worst season this season, and I think Arteta's system and his approach had something to do with it. But obviously, going back to Benfica, obviously we ended up getting over the line, but I think everyone saw there was some issues there. So bias being one, and he ended up continuing that to the next Europa League game.
Well, I looked at February, mate, as a really interesting time where, I made much of my predictions on how the season would go towards the end of it. And what I felt with Benfica and Olympiacos is they were both examples of us facing past demons, and not so much our play really mattered, but just the idea of getting over the mental hurdle of that aspect. And so that was really much more the limiting factor in terms of those ties, whereas I felt Slavia Prague, and then finally when we do get to Villarreal, that was much more an Arteta structure issue, where I was really quite disappointed. But up until that point, if you guys remember, we actually started creating against low blocks then. That actually no longer then became an issue. So if you were to track our season at February till about April, I would argue, we started creating our best XG numbers. We started creating much more chances against the low blocks. And actually, it wasn't just progression that improved. It was all the way up to the final third started to improve. But our output was inefficient. It was horrifying. But that was the case for every single top six throughout the whole year. So, but I think those two ties, just Chris, really quickly, those were examples of getting over mental hurdles. They weren't as much as structural issues, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, if we're actually looking at those games in February, I think it'd be foolish for us to ignore the games that happened. That wasn't the Europa League game. For instance, we played Wolves away from home in the start of February, and I think that was probably one of our best 30 to 45 minutes that I've seen under Arteta this season. And the fact that we lost that game 2-1,
I agree.
In some weird conditions. For me, I'm still not over that game.
I'm not.
We started even in 20 seconds.
I don't think anyone is.
No, I wasn't even that upset with the loss against Villarreal, but the way we lost against Wolves, my God, I had sleepless nights because I finally thought, okay, you know what, this is probably the turnaround for Arteta, the turnaround for Nicolas Pepe, and the turnaround for our style of football. But everything came crashing down, and that was the start again for the negative spiral because we lost again to Aston Villa the following week in some weird circumstances. There was a flap from Rob Holding, and then Matty Ryan, conceded the goal. But that game, if you watch the game again, we were done by the referee. We were creating very, very good chances, but we couldn't, convert them. And then, that then, started, reflecting back into our Europa League form, where we were creating chances, but we weren't able to finish, and then we were self-destructing. And that was our main cause of concern from February up until the end of season. We were self-constructing on a regular basis, and I think after the Villarreal game, for some reason we stopped self-destructing. We started playing a lot more how I felt Arteta wants
because
us to
there's
play.
no pressure. That's why
There was no pressure, exactly. But
well, you know what, lads? Just to interject here, I think there's a little bit of a bookmark that we need to do because from February to March in the international break, that coincided with Louise and Kieran Tierney being injured for long term, as far as our concerns, and that's when the system change occurred, right? That was crucial to, I think, our downfall in Villarreal and Europa League, where we no longer had the fullback wing overload. And look, I criticized Arteta, and I did it publicly in terms of not employing Saka on the left back, which he then did in the league after our Villarreal loss. And replicating our overloads. Like, it was my biggest critique of Arteta to date, where I said, okay, you know what, you lost us that tie. And I said that publicly. It was the reason for us kind of being kicked out. And regardless of you making injuries, you need to stick to your principles. And really replicating Saka in the left back was our best way of replicating Kieran. I said it for time. And that was the issue for me. But then after that, when you started to see the uptick in form, lads, we got them back. You got your technical leaders back. So again, it kind of just showed. I just used those little bookmarks because I think it's important when you lose David Luiz, Kieran Tierney, Xhaka, who was also lost in that time. These are big players, you know, and especially in our team who have such big holes.
Like I said as well, if I'm correct.
Yep, you are.
And Odegaard had a knock as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not using it as excuses. I don't want this to come across as excuses, but they're fundamental facts when you do consider, like, is the team complete?
No, it's not. With Xhaka, I think him being deployed at left back for me wasn't an issue because I think he gave us a solid baseline of like, I don't know, 6 out of 10. I don't think he made that many mistakes in my opinion. If I'm obviously, I don't remember that many mistakes. The Chukwueze chance, that wasn't really. He didn't really make a massive error in my opinion.
No, mate. You know what it is for me. It's not that left back. It's not that Xhaka played left back. It's that Xhaka didn't play in the center, and it's that we never had wide overload.
100%. 100. And you know what? I think I was speaking to Z yesterday about it. In January, I kept on tweeting about how we need a backup left back, right? There was, I think, probably 3 names that had 6 months left, right? Patrick Van Aanholt, Bertrand, there's some guy called Jordan Amavi. He used to play for Aston Villa. He plays for Marseille now, right? Yeah. And we was linked with all 3, right? So I'm thinking we need a left back because obviously if Tierney gets injured, we're in big trouble. You know what I'm saying? And then so I think a day after the transfer window, what came out was how we're looking for a young left back to take over the mantelpiece after like Tierney's done kind of thing. And I'm like, all right, that makes sense. But then now we're hearing that we're going for Bertrand. So it's like, which one is it? Do you know what I'm saying?
It's where I think upstairs kind of played a. It's where I think upstairs played a role. I mean, and this is where I struggle because Arteta did say we needed a backup left back, and then if you follow the news conference, he said that we didn't have the money, so he was clearly told to we couldn't do it. So
did he say that actually? Sure.
Yes, yeah, he said it in the conference that we weren't able to get.
I know that he said that we needed a left back, but I don't know if he said we didn't have the money.
Yeah, again, if we go back to the financials, in January we were not allowed to spend money. We can only lose, and that's why we got Odegaard on loan. And we can't really get players on loan that have 6 months left on their contract. So, yeah, I mean that was
so how did we get Cedric then? From if I'm not
Cedric was the year before.
Dodgy.
Yeah, I know, but then again, that was the same principle where he had 6 months left on his deal, so we got him on loan, and then we signed him.
Yeah. But it's still, mate. Like I said, he's part of that dodgy, circle of Kaya.
I'm not. I'm surprised.
Yeah. So it's best not to speak about that. We already know what comes from that. So yeah.
We've gone through February. In March, we started very badly with the Xhaka mistake against Burnley. Then we went on to beat one of our best games this season, in my opinion, Tottenham 2-1. And then we came back against West Ham 3-3. And then that was the last game of March. And then early April, we lost to Liverpool 3-0. What did you make of March, quickly?
It was tough, mate. Really quickly, like we lost our technical leaders. Like after that international break, again, it was the idea that we lost major pillars in the team. And again, we're here doing patch-up jobs on the team, trying to get results. So when you look at the results, they're inconsistent, yes. But like Kieran, David Luiz was out. Odegaard, I think, was out after that West Ham game, if I'm not mistaken. Like
he was injured and he played against Liverpool with an injury.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, yes, they're inconsistent results. I understand. But again, they coincide with us not fielding our best team. Like, I do want to make this question, lads. Do you know that we haven't been able to field our best team for more than 3 games? As shit as our team is, as crap as the floor of this team is, do you know that we have not been able to play our best team for more than 3 games?
Is that
not
because of
surprised.
injuries or?
And we've never had them fully
rotation?
fit.
Fully fit. It was because of injuries.
Because
Yep.
Partey hasn't been fully fit. Smith Rowe wasn't fully fit the whole season. Saka the
Yep.
same. Tierney the same. So
Saka got injured in the March break too. Do you guys remember too?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
didn't go to England. Him and Rashford missed England because they both got injured, so they stayed. And then we had a very, very poor game against Liverpool.
Yeah.
After-
So just like Chris, just to like really wrap up that segment, so I guess we get to Villarreal in the ending. Really, it just goes to show the inconsistency of the season, where it's just a matter of not seeing those players available. That's really where I'm at.
Okay. So going into April. We played Slavia Prague, Sheffield United, Fulham, and then Villarreal. So Fulham, Sheffield United, and Slavia Prague Slavia Prague and Sheffield United more so were very, very good performances on our part, beating them 3-0 and then Slavia Prague 4-0 in the second leg. And then Fulham was a weird game, 1-1, and then Everton we lost 1-0. So, and then we went into the Villarreal game. What did you make of that overall and the Villarreal exit?
The exit was the culmination for me, where this is the first time I place on Arteta. This was his fault, and I'm going to repeat it for those that think I just blindly support him. It was his fault. His structure was completely the reason why we went out of that tie. If he had played Saka left back like we had seen in the league, actually, ironically, the next couple weeks, we would have won that tie. 100%, no doubt in my mind, even with Xhaka injured. And it goes to show that, look, he is a young manager. And I said this previously in a couple pods, where he's a phenomenal coach, but a really rookie manager. And this was really just that Villarreal tie was the epitome of that statement. You can't be questioning your principles and changing the system to something that clearly isn't comfortable to the squad, and doing it before such an important Europa League night on a fragile mental squad, who already is impaired. We saw it in Benfica and Olympiacos. This squad cannot do it. So you have to give them the tools to perform how they know best. Familiarity is your best friend in that situation. So for me,
spot on,
it was horrible.
I think one of the things that really annoyed me was, if I'm not mistaken, what's his name? Chambers got dropped for Bellerin. I'm pretty sure Bellerin didn't play for like 4 or 5 games.
Yeah.
That is a decision that really I couldn't understand it at all. What was he trying to do? I don't.
Yeah, if you actually go look back to the press conference at the time, I don't think Chambers was fully fit as well.
Yeah.
So that actually caused one of the main reasons why Bellerin had to play those 2 games. Again, when we look at those Villarreal games, it was our main important players. They weren't there, so Arteta, had to adjust, to whatever he had, and then obviously we can all use that term. He went all galaxy brain on the team, and ultimately we lost. But
100%.
His hand was forced. He was very unlucky, and that's how I'm looking at it in hindsight. At the time, I was like, Arteta's messed this up. He's got to go. But now that I'm looking at it now, I'm like, no. It was actually really unlucky on his end. Honestly.
I can understand where Z is coming. Just quickly, I can understand where Z is coming from in terms of Chambers not being fit. But I remember when Arteta said Cedric is our best right back in terms of the final third.
Yeah,
so if he's our best right back in terms of final third, why would you bring in someone that technically, like, he's not very good, he's shaky defensively and whatnot? I'd rather have, like, Bellerin. He's not specialised in anything. That's my own opinion. You lot might have something else, but in my opinion, he's not specialised in anything, right? And I think one of the reasons why Cedric got dropped is maybe because of his diminutive form. So I'm saying, because obviously you can tell the difference between him and why Chambers is like. Because Chambers is more physical, he's a presence and whatnot. So I would have, so if Chambers is not fit, then surely Cedric is the second option. Because you cannot bring me Bellerin, who has not played well in the entire season. If that makes sense.
And another player, by the way, I might add, who's probably been told or knows that his future is not with the club. I might add. So it's look, it was shocking all around, and I don't really have a defense for it. I think it's his fault, and he's the reason that we went out of the Europa League. But again, I said it at the time too, lads. I see more pros and times where he's won us games and where he's lost us games. So while I can objectively say that he lost us that game, and he did, I think if you're tallying points and we're actually doing a side-by-side comparison, I've seen more wins in the pros than I have in the cons column. But again, I'll repeat for those that may not be able to hear, he was at fault, and he was the reason that we lost the Europa League final. What?
Semi-final.
I agree.
Or semi-final, sorry.
Yeah, I agree. He was mainly at fault for that loss. He overdid it. He overfought it. He put us in a position where the players were at a disadvantage. So.
And then we ended the season, Chris, on beautiful form, by the way.
Yep,
I don't know
we didn't lose in May.
Yeah.
We didn't lose in May.
Can I just add one more thing? Also, I know it's hypotheticals and everything, but I honestly believe by the way Man United played, I think we would have won that final. To be honest, a lot of their big players, bottled it, including Bruno, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I think honestly, if he didn't overcomplicate tactics, which is kind of funny because Pep does it as well, so I know where he gets it from, if that makes sense. But honestly, if I'm not mistaken, United haven't beat us for a while in the league. Ever since we played them, I think.
Since 2019, they haven't beaten us.
Yeah.
They're not people. Obviously on Twitter and everything, people, especially United fans, they like to laud their players as something special. They're not, in my opinion, they're not. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. But like I said, it's hypotheticals and everything. But I really think if Arteta didn't mess that them two games up, we definitely would have won the game, in my opinion.
Okay. So going into the last month of the season in May, we played five league games, winning 2-0 Newcastle, 3-1 West Brom, 1-0 against Chelsea, 3-1 against Crystal Palace, and 2-0 against Brighton. Fair to say that when there's no pressure, we perform at our best. What did you make of May at the end of the season?
It's a disgrace, I think. It's really a disgrace, man, because we knew more or less we're not going to be in the European competition next season if we don't win the Europa League. But the fact that they went on this run, knowing that obviously we won't have anything paid for and everything, is very disgraceful to me, to be honest.
If I'm being honest, though, lads, I think we saw the return of profiles then too. If I'm really being fair, Saka did go left back. If we remember, this is part of my huge frustration. And we saw a return to our principles of play. And so, look, you know what it did is it reaffirmed to me that when you have those principles of play in place, we dominate and we can win and we can actually put consistency in our game. That's what it did to me, and it showed. So when you return to that, overlapping potential on the left, right? And when you combine those progression principles, we racked up clean sheets, we racked up lots of goals. Second most. And I'd argue, lads, that was pretty entertaining. I rewatched Brighton, and that was a good game. That was a great game. I know it sucked in terms of our end goal, but that was a great game. So
it was in isolation, it was a good, and obviously them running games they were decent. I'm not going to lie, but the objective was to try and reach the final. So them games, it really doesn't make any sense to me, from quite honest, because we had one objective and we messed up.
To be fair, there's something interesting that I noticed is the style of play. So I thought that we actually reverted back to how we played under Arteta pre-lockdown, and it's pretty interesting because that's how I thought Arteta would move forward with us. But I think after lockdown he started playing with more of a free at the back. I think more so after the loss against Brighton. But it's really interesting because of the way we press and the profiles that played on the pitch were very similar to how we set his team up, for example, against Chelsea and United. So I'm hoping that he plays like that. He sets his team up like that next season. And I don't know about you, George or Chris. What do you guys think? Did you guys see the same kind of setup that pre-lockdown, or no?
Well, in the last 5 games of the season, we were probably probably one of our best runs throughout the season. We broke down low blocks with ease, created so many chances, scored a lot of goals, the second most in the league, only after Liverpool in that period, and Liverpool went on a big run. So the end of the season showed maybe some positives, but at the same time, there's less to play for, so you can't take too much
Too late.
in games. But it's definitely a positive to win 5 games in a row, regardless of where it is in the season. But to do it when it mattered least was a bit
Exactly. That's my point. That's my point. Doing it when it doesn't really matter, that's very unforgivable in my opinion.
But did you guys notice the similarities between pre-lockdown and the last 5 games of the season? Because I honestly can't stop thinking about it, because for me, maybe the patterns of play suffered a little bit post-lockdown, but pre-lockdown we were playing some very, very good football. And then when I was watching the games against Brighton, even Chelsea, for instance, we were playing from some very, very decent football. And
I think West Ham was good as well.
West Brom was very good especially with the Saka and Smith Rowe link up.
Made its way. I said before, it was the return to our principles, and so I really wasn't surprised at the form coinciding with our return to principles of play. But look, I think probably just to wrap up my conclusion of the season as a whole, since we've kind of arrived at the end.
Yeah, rate it as well. Rate it out of 10.
Yeah, I would probably say it's a 5 out of 10. It's a 5 out of 10. Like, I don't know how you can like logically say that it's been a good season. I understand the reasons that we've arrived there, but it's been poor. No trophy, 8th. We got 3 points, I believe, greater than last season. But still, we progressed a little bit farther in the Europa League, but we never reached our objectives, and it's not good enough, right? But the one thing I will say, because I did predict at the beginning of the season I wanted a philosophy to be involved with, and I see it. So it checked my personal objective of the season, where I said, okay, I see a philosophy, and now this summer I expect us to go and address the starting 11 gaps. And then my expectation raises to top 4. It does. I've said it before with the lads, but I'd say 5 out of 10. You can't rate it higher. I don't think.
Yeah,
you rate out of 10.
I would say, yeah, I would honestly, it has to be a 5 out of 10. You can't justify to anyone. I mean, you can try, but a 5 out of 10 is the most you can get, I'm quite honest. In terms of what George said, in terms of obviously if you get the right profiles in, then also the expectations will grow. But my issue with that is we can't guarantee that we're going to get them profiles in, if that makes sense. Because before we even look at the attack, for example, or the midfield, we need 2 new fullbacks, maybe even a keeper, right? Obviously, from what I see, maybe we might get a new centre back, right? That's even before we look into centre mid or attack or whatever. So that's an issue. I don't know if you're going to, but I hope so. But in terms of the whole season, for me, it's not been impressive at all. But in terms of style of play, I have seen it in bits and bobs. But I need to see it on a greater scale next season. Like, in terms of maybe even like 90 minutes, if that makes sense.
Okay,
Yeah, I'd give it a 4 out of 10. I think it's been a very poor season when I'm just looking at like a holistic view. But I'm expecting huge improvements next season, not only because of the players that we'll bring in, but also because of the fixtures. We're going to have a game a week, and it's going to give Arteta a lot of time to work with those players on the pitch and ultimately implement his style of play. And yeah, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if we do like solidify ourselves in the top 4 next season. I'm going to put it out there that I wouldn't be surprised at all, especially if we get the players that we want and we're interested in. So yeah, 4 out of 10. Yeah. But next season we're going to be in the top 4, 100%.
And not 4th. Okay, for me, it was a 5 out of 10 season. The first half of the season was maybe a 1 out of 10. The second half is what brings it up for me. The second half gave me a lot of positives for the future. Even with our loans, gave me a lot of positives for the future. So overall, the season was a poor one, definitely, because we didn't meet any targets and we didn't improve on last season necessarily. So a 5 out of 10 is fair for me. And before we wrap up, I wanted to ask everybody, who's your player of the season?
For me, it's easy. It's Bukayo Saka. In terms of consistency over the entire season, he's been our technical reference at freaking 19 years of age. He's dug us out of holes countless times. And if you're looking at even in our worst run of the form, he was consistently our best player, even in our darkest days. So for me, it has to be Bukayo Saka, despite Emile pushing him really quite close,
Yes.
like very close. But
And improving
Bukayo did it before Emile did. So for me, and he also did it, by the way, in different areas of the pitch, in defense, midfield, and attack. He showed his output. So, yeah.
Z?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Saka as well, but I think what changed the season and what made our season was the inclusion of Emile Smith-Rowe, and for that and that only, we have to put Emile Smith-Rowe as a player of the season. So yeah.
No.
Honestly, I think it's Saka, just because of how a 19-year-old has put the club on his back for a lot of the season, which for me is a bit embarrassing in terms of being a senior player, knowing that a 19-year-old is doing much more than you should be doing, if that makes sense. So for me, it's 100% Saka.
Okay. For me, it's definitely Saka. It's definitely Saka, but Emile ran him close. Saka did everything this season. At one point in the season, only at the right wing position, he had more goals and assists than games played at that position. So at 19 years of age, him being our best player and getting us out of games like Benfica and stuff like that, for me, is definitely Saka. So we're going to wrap this up. We've all said our player of the season. We reviewed the games. We loved having you on, Mo. It was a very good episode.
Thank you, man. It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you for the opportunity. It's my first time on YouTube and everything like that. So thank you for bringing me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, George.
Nice.
Yeah, cheers, lads. Thanks for everything, Mo. Thank you for popping in. It was really great having your insight. And yeah, I hope we were able to kind of break down the season in a decent way for everybody.
And again, Z, thank you for coming on and giving your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This podcast is going to be on Spotify very shortly, I think on Monday. And once that's on, I hope you guys will spread the word that Ball Over Passion is here to take over. Apart from that, it's a goodbye from me.
Yeah, and quickly, just the last thing I just wanted to say is Arsenal will finish top 4 next season and they will not be on an even number. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share and subscribe and see you next week, guys.